The development process often feels chaotic, haphazard, and arbitrary, especially for new participants or outsiders. It often seems more difficult than it should be, a process where you take one step forward and two steps back. This dynamic is not only frustrating, but it can compound the challenges that are already inherent in the development process if stakeholders, especially interested local residents and local leaders, interpret what can be natural fluctuations as evidence of bad faith or poor capacity. However, unscrupulous developers can also take advantage of this confusion when local stakeholders and officials don't have some core understanding of the process that allows them to hold developers accountable. To help counteract these concerns and to empower local communities, we've developed the Development Process Map to help stakeholders, local officials, and grassroots organizations better understand this process. The Development Process Map provides an overview of the development process. At a high level, the process map is a simple matrix. The columns, moving from left to right, follow a project through typical stages, from forming the concept to testing its feasibility, putting the deal together, actually building it, and eventually into an operations or sale phase. Key decision points mark the end of each stage. If a solid go decision can't be reached, the circular nature of development comes into view, as earlier stages must be updated, reconsidered, or changed altogether in order to form or reform a viable development concept that can move toward fruition. At the same time, development is an interdisciplinary exercise involving a range of perspectives and professionals. In general, the rows or channels in the matrix follow the progression of key disciplines and issue areas. These include market, site, design, construction, finance, and project management. In some cases, the channels may overlap into one another as a project progresses. For example, design eventually transitions into construction, and market evolves from assessment to testing to marketing and eventually into ongoing property management. The initial phases of the development process are often the most amorphous. Community-based organizations rarely start with the primary goal of becoming real estate developers. Instead, development is usually the means to an end. An organization may be concerned about youth in the community, or the need for more and better green space, improving the health of the community, serving the needs of homeless or other special needs populations, or simply improving the look and feel of their neighborhood. The decision to become involved in development often evolves from the underlying purpose and goals of the organization. We begin with forming the development concept. At some point, when approaching either a site or a community need that the private market has not been able to address on its own, community groups often find themselves asking, if not us, then who? And if not now, then when? And they begin to explore how they can move an idea from concept to reality. At this early stage, there are several channels of information coming together and interacting with one another. When starting from a given site, the first step in the market channel is to begin testing alternative uses for the site. We know where we want to do something. Now we have to figure out what we want to do. Which community needs might be addressed by developing this site in a given way? What do local stakeholders and leaders want to see? What is possible? For a given use, the what, we can begin to define the type of site we need. How big must the property be? What characteristics must it have, or must it not have? For example, many retail or franchise chains have very specific formulas for site selection, identifying specific minimum and maximum acreage standards, requirements for daily traffic counts on nearby roads, or proximity to other complementary or competing uses. When we're working from a given site, however, as we explore potential uses and test them against market information and perspectives, assessing the physical aspects of the site helps inform the choices we might make. Are there specific architectural or engineering constraints, like the presence of wetlands, that might limit the size or placement of structures? Or are there legal considerations we must account for? This could range from zoning requirements that allow certain potential uses but not others, to liability concerns resulting from prior uses of the site. Whatever the starting point, the market and design channels eventually come together to identify a specific use for a specific site. When the what and where have been married together, we can establish a more specific market goal and develop initial conceptual plans for how the buildings on the site might be laid out, given physical and legal limitations. If a development concept is going to move beyond the idea stage and become an actual project, it must be financially feasible. Early on, much of the focus is going to be on estimating a rough cost. As the specific site and building plans start to come into focus, experts can begin to develop back-of-the-envelope projections on cost. These are often based on very general industry standards, like a total cost per square foot for commercial construction, or they reflect initial information about items like a property's asking price or prior estimates that quantify potential environmental remediation costs. As the design team provides greater specificity, rough cost estimates can be refined further by taking into account early projections of the size and type of buildings or special construction issues driven by site characteristics. In turn, this allows the development of an initial financing plan, where commonly available sources of financing are penciled into a project in an effort to determine its feasibility. For most projects that community-based organizations undertake, or projects promoted by local government, there will be a gap between initial cost projections and commercially available sources of financing. This is where various forms of public or philanthropic financing come into play, ranging from below-market financing to tax credits, to grants, to soft loans or other forms of direct financing. It is just as important to gauge the realistic likelihood of receiving such funding as evaluating the financing that may be commercially available. Specific uses also have access to specific funding sources. Affordable housing and other types of economic development projects often can take advantage of special pots of money. As the development concept comes together, we can assemble an initial financial plan that identifies the estimated and likely sources and uses for the project. While much can change later, this provides an initial roadmap that will be supplemented over time with much more specific information. This is a critical part of the process and deserves us spending a little time walking through it. It will help you and your community get a sense of who's doing what and what everyone's responsibilities should be. The idea of a development process presumes the presence of a developer. In a normal project, the developer is at once the playwright and the director. She dreams up the story, writes the script, and will lead the interdisciplinary team that turns the written play into a full-blown performance, one that, if successful, will attract throngs of theatergoers. For many community-driven projects, however, the process is somewhat different. Community stakeholders, whether nonprofit organizations or local officials, may have identified a need, determined that sufficient demand exists to put on a play, and selected the script. But for many reasons, ranging from a lack of capacity to risk aversion to their own sense of the organization's appropriate role, they may not be in the position to direct the play. In such cases, the community stakeholders may determine that their role should be limited to that of a patron or sponsor. And this could mean helping to support the project development concept by recruiting a director, offering up the venue, in other words, donating or selling the site, helping bankroll the initial investment needed to hire actors and build the set, or even contributing to the audience by pre-purchasing tickets, in other words, agreeing to lease a portion of the project upon completion. Once the developer has been identified, however, the execution is ultimately her responsibility. She will make a myriad of decisions along the way that ultimately affect the performance. At this stage, the developer will engage a team of professionals, the development team, to assist in the project. As with most plays, there will be major and minor characters. Key roles here include the market analyst, someone highly skilled in evaluating the business climate for the proposed use of the site, assessing the likely demand for the product being offered, and providing insights to help refine and shape the product to maximize value. The architect is responsible for taking the initial ideas about what to build and fleshing them out into detailed plans and specifications, telling the builder or general contractor exactly how to build the structures. In most cases, the architect will also be supported by various engineering disciplines, including civil and structural engineers and landscape architects or interior designers. Finally, experienced legal counsel is vital and must be engaged early in the process. Not only will they have input on contracts with development team members, but projects that are community-driven often involve complex development agreements with various public entities that contribute to the project in one way or another. Depending on the skill and experience of the developer, other consultants may be employed who specialize in obtaining financing, especially from public funders, or layering multiple funding sources together for complex projects. Finally, while the project is still at the conceptual phase and may be years away from completion, engaging marketing and/or property management professionals early on is also very common. For residential real estate in particular, the realtors or marketing agents who will ultimately show the property to potential residents, and the property management company that will have day-to-day oversight of multifamily properties, including condominiums, often have valuable insights about how to design and build a project to make ongoing operations more effective, efficient, and attractive to potential clients. To effectively manage the development team, the developer will need to clearly articulate roles and responsibilities. She must carefully select the development team to ensure that team members not only have the necessary specialty skills, but also function effectively together. To use the metaphor of the play, many productions have been plagued by a diva-like star who does not know how to play well with others. And the developer must develop a system or process for overall project management. In relatively small projects, this may be as simple as developing good to-do lists and holding regular team meetings to track progress. But in many cases, more complex project management systems will be necessary. These are often software packages that use Gantt chart approaches, outline the relative timelines between steps and critical path perspectives, and highlight interrelationships between different quasi-independent paths. As a project moves from the conceptual stages towards establishing feasibility, a developer will begin to expend funds. But because development is a risky proposition, the development process tends to proceed in ways that allow at-risk funds to be expended incrementally, constantly testing the waters before wading in deeper. The point of feasibility review is to drill down, moving from general rules of thumb to project-specific projections, and making sure that the developer can, as much as possible, identify all the details and justify those projections with supporting data. If, on closer review, the development concept isn't likely to be feasible, the process starts over. To use a different analogy, forming the development concept is like dating. You may go through a lot of first dates to find someone who matches what you're looking for and for whom you are a good fit. Feasibility is about really getting to know each other, flaws and all. In some cases, this phase ends with a breakup and re-entry into the dating pool. But when the development concept proves to be sound and attractive, by the end of the feasibility phase, you're now engaged. The future direction is clear, though you're not married just yet. When designing the development concept, we paid some level of attention to the market for the project. At the early stage, our market data tends to come from what's readily available: census data, government data on regional economic activity, or information from past community planning initiatives. But once we've identified a specific use at a specific site, the developer must begin collecting more rigorous market data that tests the viability of the proposed project. In some cases, if we know the specific user or tenant, this may be as simple as beginning discussions about their needs and desires for the project and the budget for ongoing leasing or ownership costs. But in most cases where a project needs to serve a mix of potential tenants or buyers, many of which are still unknown at this point, we may need more formal market analysis. As one developer properly puts it, without site control, all you have is an idea. In many cases, the goal is to redevelop a given site, often one that's locally important but challenging, maybe one that's publicly owned. But whether in public or private hands, once she's deemed the development concept worth pursuing, the developer must obtain control of the site. Usually, this is done through a purchase option, which gives the developer an exclusive right to purchase the property at a given price for some period of time, but doesn't obligate the developer to complete the purchase. Usually an option includes a non-refundable payment to the seller to compensate them for holding the property off the market while the developer works to put the full transaction together. But by not obligating the developer to complete the purchase, the developer can choose to cut bait if further due diligence reveals that the development concept is not feasible and unable to proceed. At the conceptual stage, the architect probably focused on approximate footprints for where structures might go on the site. It wasn't yet necessary to get into great detail about exactly what the building would look like, how the interior space would lay out, and so on. And by not getting too far ahead, the developer could limit her costs by not doing more than necessary when the project was still just an idea. As we progress into the feasibility determination phase of the development process, it is necessary to take the design beyond generic boxes and begin developing initial schematics that include elevations or drawings showing the face of buildings from different directions, and initial floor plans that lay out in a general form how different spaces, such as residential units and commercial storefronts, are likely to fit together in the building overall. For the purposes of forming the development concept, we approximated the initial economic viability using back-of-the-envelope industry norms and high-level assumptions. But as the developer moves into the feasibility stage, we need more refined projections. We'll develop a detailed pro forma, informed by the project-specific due diligence that we conduct in the market, site, and design channels, as previously discussed. We update total development cost based on site-specific information and investigations. For example, environmental testing results allow the developer to make more accurate projections of remediation and cleanup costs. Specific design decisions that reflect zoning and other local requirements inform more precise construction cost estimates. A gap between total costs and commercially available financing exists in many projects undertaken and promoted by community-based organizations and local stakeholders. Quantifying that gap allows the developer to begin approaching public sources like tax credits or incentives, public financing, grants, and cost sharing, or private philanthropic sources like foundations or angel investors. At the same time, the developer will begin discussing the specific project with commercial lenders in an effort to find the best financing package available and start to negotiate transaction terms. Throughout this period, we continually update the project's pro forma with refined projections, and often the developer will use different what-if scenarios to test the impact of various financing options, design choices, and more or less aggressive or optimistic revenue projections. When forming the development concept, the developer began to recruit and select her team of professionals. But like a sports team working its way through the preseason, it may be that certain core team members, the star quarterback and his primary receiver, are clearly on the team, while other role players have not yet been selected or are effectively still trying out. By the end of the feasibility stage, the need for specific role players, like a specialized environmental consultant, should be clear, and those members should be selected. If the end of the feasibility stage is like getting engaged, the deal-making phase will culminate in the wedding. But this stage involves a great deal of planning and negotiating. No detail is too small, whether that means working out the seating chart so that Uncle Joe has a good seat but isn't likely to run into his least favorite brother-in-law, or in the case of development, picking out the carpet colors, plumbing fixtures, and maybe even the furniture. And while love may be in the air, it's also when we work out an ironclad prenup. Of course, in the case of development, there isn't just one agreement, but a whole series of interrelated agreements that bind the parties together. As with relationships, the closer one gets to closing the deal, the higher the cost of walking away. But until that point, things can still fall apart, leaving someone jilted at the altar. If you build it, they will come. That may have been a memorable movie line, but that does not work in real estate. To obtain financing, especially for commercial buildings or for-sale housing, lenders often require that some portion of a project be pre-leased or pre-sold. So now is the time to start implementing the marketing strategy. By the time this phase ends and the transaction closes, the marketing effort will start to merge with the eventual property management plan. This plan includes clear benchmarks for handing off control of the building or buildings when construction is complete, and how day-to-day issues like landscaping, snow removal, maintenance, and so on will be handled. As the project moves closer to the final go, no-go point of closing, the developer will submit formal applications for needed government approvals. This usually involves various zoning reviews, site plan approvals, and so on. Depending on the project and the area, this may involve a series of other approvals, often from multiple layers of government. For example, zoning and site plan may be under the purview of the city and its planning commission, while various incentives or public financing approvals may come from quasi-independent boards or authorities. Regional infrastructure authorities or utility companies may have to sign off on the project before it can access necessary utilities. Other public funding approvals may come from state or even federal agencies. Projects on environmentally sensitive or waterfront sites may be subject to a host of other reviews and approvals on issues ranging from stormwater, wetland, and flooding concerns to protections for native or endangered species. From rough boxes outlined to a specific elevation and floor plan schematics, in the deal-making phase, design moves on to construction drawings, or blueprints, and the development of specifications. Instead of simply giving a look at the finished product, construction drawings provide details necessary to build the project, down to instructions about where to place electrical outlets and heating and cooling vents, and what type of carpet to install in common hallways. A developer uses construction drawings not only to obtain building permits and potentially other public approvals, but also as the basis for obtaining firm construction pricing. We continue to revise and refine the project's pro forma. Our initial back-of-the-envelope numbers give way to estimates that are professionally informed and project-specific. Now, as deal-making progresses, we can fill in actual contracted amounts based on pre-leasing activity and firm bids for construction. The budget should still have contingencies built in, a pot of money just in case, because no project ever performs exactly as projected. But while the numbers aren't guaranteed to be perfect, the level of deviation that we expect gets smaller. This can be a delicate stage, especially for projects with complex financing plans involving multiple layers of conventional and public funding. The developer will need to navigate overlapping and sometimes contradictory starting expectations from different funders and ensure that discrepancies are resolved. Because most funders do not lock in certain financial terms, especially interest rates, until the very last minute, small shifts in the broader financial markets can require last-minute adjustments to the deal, and in extreme cases can lead to a project's failure to proceed. Specific applications are made for all forms of financing, public and private, and specific deal terms are negotiated. Many projects will require that developers, or in some cases other parties, put up equity, or at-risk cash that ensures the developer has skin in the game. There may also be a variety of financial guarantees, like promising to put up additional funding to ensure construction completion in the case of cost overruns, or to fund operating deficits if actual lease-up rates prove lower than expected once construction. The deal-making phase can be exhausting for the developer. The process is highly interdependent, and many factors are beyond her control. For example, a freak power outage that delays a city council meeting where a tax incentive was slated to be approved might cause a project to miss an application deadline for below-market rate financing from a state government agency. The delay while waiting for the next application cycle in turn leads to changes in the interest rate for the primary financing, as well as increased construction costs, since the revised construction timeline now requires building through the winter or a rainy season. In general, the developer's role is to hold the contracted professionals accountable for producing their contributions to the overall effort, and for choreographing the complicated dance between all the different channels and outside parties that must converge for a closing to take place. Throughout this phase, the developer will be negotiating, usually in multiple rounds, seeking to reconcile different expectations from different parties to the overall effort. This can include not just the funding sources involved, but also ensuring that the design team incorporates last-minute changes, requested, for example, by the Planning Commission, and that those same changes are then communicated to the contractor and reflected in the pricing. Closing is a major milestone, and like a wedding, it is often the cause for celebration. The development project is definitely real, and barring a catastrophic situation, there's no backing out now. But despite the euphoria of the honeymoon period immediately following closing, there's still much to do in the construction phase, and a great deal to coordinate to ensure that relationships now cemented remain strong. At or immediately following closing, the developer is likely to sign contracts with the marketing and property management team. In some projects, these duties may be split, with a real estate agent responsible for sales, in the case of condominiums, or leasing, for residential and commercial tenants, and a property management company eventually taking day-to-day control of activities like maintenance, janitorial, and landscaping. For multifamily rental projects, the same company may be responsible for all marketing, leasing, and property management duties. And, of course, it is common for the developer, often through a related party entity, to keep these responsibilities in-house. In commercial projects, the marketing and property management team will help coordinate communication between tenants who have pre-leased spaces and the construction team, making sure that any changes to the timeline are clear to all concerned, and that any tenant build-out activities included in the construction contract are properly communicated. From a finance standpoint, the construction phase is largely about drawing down funding sources when needed to ensure the contractor and other costs, like interim insurance, property taxes, and marketing costs, can be paid when they're due. Communication will be key, as many funders, especially public funders, have detailed reporting requirements that must be met in order to access funds. Even conventional lenders require substantial paperwork to be submitted in order to track actual progress against the draw schedule and various other requirements. If delays, cost overruns, or other construction issues affect the draw schedule or create gaps in the overall project budget, it is critical to address them as early and directly as possible with a project's funders. As the director of a complicated and dynamic live performance, the developer continues to coordinate, communicate, cajole, and encourage the various actors throughout the construction period. The spotlight is on construction, and in some projects, the developer will hire a specific construction manager to represent her interests and keep that portion of the process moving. But, as we noted earlier, the marketing and property management team needs to be engaged, and funders need to be informed of the project's progress, any hiccups, and how issues are being addressed. As the process progresses, a smart developer will also make a concerted effort to keep the neighboring residents informed of how the project is moving along. As the building nears completion, the developer usually plans a grand opening or other similar event. This serves at least two distinct purposes. First, the event publicizes the availability of the project to the public, thereby helping to ensure the project's economic success by attracting additional tenants or buyers or customers for the commercial tenants in the building. And second, the event recognizes the efforts of the many partners and stakeholders involved in taking the project from concept to reality. Following construction completion, most projects move on to an interim phase of lease-up and stabilization, meaning there are relatively certain operating expenses and income. The day the contractor turns over the building, it's ready for occupancy, but not yet occupied. Financially, this means there's little to no revenue coming in from tenants, but operating expenses are already going out. If the building was pre-leased, then this period may be short, but in many cases, even with key pre-leases in place, there may be spaces that still need to be marketed in order to reach a point of stabilized operations. After that point, ongoing attention will be needed to sustain that stability and manage future changes as tenants turn over, markets change, and the building ages and requires increasing maintenance, and eventually infusions of new capital. For-sale projects may not have the same timeline, at least for the developer, but few projects are fully pre-sold, and even those that are will need to actually close. Once the development is stabilized, the property management team will be responsible for the day-to-day operation of the project, keeping tenants happy and managing turnover as original tenants move out and new tenants are identified to move in. They need to develop and track annual budgets, adjusting to conditions on the ground, and ensuring that the project is meeting its financial obligations in the short term, ideally without sacrificing long-term success of the project, the tracking of which brings an asset management perspective into play. During stabilization, and even for the first year following construction completion, the design team and contractor may have some responsibilities. Mostly, this will entail any warranty repairs from the contractor for items that were not apparent at final inspection. If development projects are like children, each one unique but usually progressing through a series of predictable milestones on a general schedule within a normal range of variance, then construction completion could be seen to represent a project's birth. The job of the parent, i.e. the developer and now the owner, is by no means complete. In fact, it is only just starting. The team of people supporting the developer may be smaller, with ongoing reliance on the in-laws, babysitters, and some close friends and neighbors, but no longer needing the obstetrician. The owner must still manage the team, making sure the development is properly managed and maintained, bills, especially the mortgage, are paid on time, and that proper reporting is submitted to all concerned parties. For more information on how to prepare communities for the real estate development process and other helpful tools, visit www.groundworkusa.org/development.